Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a massive paradox that pretty much defines our modern age. I mean, think about it. We are living in a hyper-connected world, right? But somehow, we're finding ourselves more isolated than ever before. We're going to navigate this really fascinating terrain through the critical lens of the contemporary philosopher Byung-Chul Han. His main argument? That we've actually lost the very structural foundation of our lives. So, let me just ask you this directly. Are you feeling burnt out? Constantly bombarded with notifications, hyper-connected to literally everyone, yet somehow profoundly lonely? Well, if you're nodding along right now, you are experiencing exactly what Han diagnoses as our modern condition. It's this pervasive sense of digital fatigue and, frankly, existential homelessness. We're communicating endlessly, sure, but we aren't truly connecting. And I think this brilliant quote perfectly illustrates the core of the issue. Listen to this. The digital swarm does not develop a we. It lacks the spirit that would be necessary for a we. Han is pointing out the massive, fundamental difference between simply sharing data across a network and actually sharing a life within a real community. Just clicking like on a post or sharing something you're outraged about, that doesn't build a society. So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the crisis of connection. Then we'll unpack the architecture of time. Next, we step inside the digital swarm, explore the inferno of the same, uncover the trap of auto-exploitation, and finally, look at reclaiming the good life. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the crisis of connection and our modern paradox.
Let's break down the fundamental difference between a true community and a digital network. Now, authentic community, it actually requires friction. It involves shared obligations, commitments, and the kind of transformative encounters that genuinely challenge you. A digital network, on the other hand, is completely utility-driven. It relies on frictionless information exchange rather than what Han calls saber, which means true deep knowledge. Networks give us fast data and incredibly fragile connections, but without any of the depth or shared sacrifice required to build real, lasting bonds.
Which brings us to Section 2, the architecture of time and how we actually make time habitable.
Han introduces this absolutely beautiful concept called temporal architecture. He defines it as the rituals and symbolic structures that organize human life. Think of it this way. It's a great metaphor. What a house does for physical space, rituals do for time. They give us a place to dwell. They provide a stable rhythm so that time doesn't just rush past us as an endless, exhausting blur of deadlines and data.
But we have to be super careful not to confuse rituals with routines. Routines are purely utilitarian. Brushing your teeth, checking your email inbox, these are just repetitive actions driven entirely by efficiency, getting things done. Rituals are a completely different animal. They create islands of deceleration. They provide narrative closure and shared meaning. When a community gathers for a festival or a shared meal, it's not about being productive, right? It's about anchoring time and giving life actual depth.
As Han says, rituals stabilize life. They make life last. But today, our modern compulsion to constantly produce and consume is actively destroying these rituals. Market logic simply cannot tolerate activities that don't produce measurable outcomes. So what ends up happening? Our sacred festivals and holidays are hollowed out. They just become mere shopping opportunities. And in the process, we lose those essential stabilizing moments of rest and shared meaning.
Okay, let's move on to Section 3, inside the digital swarm, where we see communication without any real community.
Han defines this new state of being as the digital swarm. It's basically a collection of isolated individuals who produce an endless stream of digital noise and outrage. But crucially, they never form a cohesive, actionable we. A swarm is vastly different from a unified political crowd. A crowd actually marches with a shared voice and purpose. A swarm is just a bunch of solitary egos buzzing loudly behind their separate screens.
Just notice how accurately these symptoms map onto our daily digital behavior. We act as isolated egos. Meaningful silence is completely eradicated by constant noise. Real political action is replaced by passive clicking, what we sometimes call slacktivism. Online outrage flares up in what Han literally calls a shitstorm, but it rapidly dissipates because this constant stream of fast data lacks depth, duration, and any meaningful closure. And the smartphone? It basically becomes a digital confessional. It's a device for narcissistic self-exposure rather than an instrument for building community.
This perfectly sets up Section 4, the inferno of the same and the profound loss of the other.
The inferno of the same is a heavy, heavy concept. It represents a societal state where true difference is just completely eradicated. Everything around us is curated by algorithms to be familiar, safe, and comfortable. When we are only ever presented with things we already like, we completely lose the mystery, the friction, and the challenge of the unknown.
And this leads directly to the disappearance of the other. We no longer treat our screens as windows to view different perspectives. Instead, they act as narcissistic mirrors where we only want to see our own self-image reflected back at us. You see this absolutely everywhere. Look at dating apps where human beings are treated as interchangeable commodities to be swiped away if they aren't perfect. Or social media echo chambers that shield us from opposing views. Even the omnipresent like button. It entirely erases the necessary negativity and friction that is actually required for true human growth.
Let's dive into Section 5 to see the ultimate result of all this, the trap of auto-exploitation in the achievement society.
So, we find ourselves isolated, deprived of our stabilizing rituals, and trapped in an endless echo chamber. In the past, we lived in what was called a disciplinary society. That world was driven by the word should. Think of bosses, factory foremen, external rules creating obedient subjects. But today we live in an achievement society, driven by the modal verb can. The control is no longer external at all, it's an internal compulsion. We are told we can do anything, be anything, optimize everything. We've effectively become the ruthless bosses of our own lives, acting as self-exploiting entrepreneurs of the self.
This is auto-exploitation. It's the process where we voluntarily, and often passionately, exploit our own energy, our own sleep, and our own time. We're driven by this invisible mandate to constantly optimize ourselves for the market. Actually, in this society, the pressure to be your authentic self becomes completely indistinguishable from the pressure to brand yourself and endlessly increase your own human capital.
And here is perhaps Han's most piercing insight of all. He says, auto-exploitation is more efficient than allo-exploitation, meaning external exploitation, because it is accompanied by a feeling of freedom. This is the ultimate trick of the modern neoliberal regime. When an external boss forces you to work to the bone, you can rebel against them. But when you are forcing yourself to work through the night because you've convinced yourself it's self-realization, well, who do you rebel against? This is exactly why our era is defined by anxiety, depression, and burnout. Our exhaustion literally feels like a personal failure of freedom.
So how do we fix this? That brings us to our final section, Section 6, Reclaiming the Good Life Through Philosophical Resistance.
The crucial starting point here is understanding the stark difference between passive optimism and active hope. Modern culture constantly sells us passive optimism. It's a toxic positivity that tells us to just ignore the negative and trust the universe will work it all out. Han argues this is a trap that just isolates us even further. What we desperately need is active hope. Active hope doesn't ignore the darkness, it acknowledges despair, but it uses that very desperation as the fuel to forge a new future and actively engage with the other.
Here are the actionable philosophical practices Han suggests for real resistance. First up, embrace meaningful silence. We absolutely must unplug and step away from the digital noise to rediscover contemplation. Second, acknowledge the true other. Allow yourself to be challenged by people and ideas that are genuinely different from you without trying to consume them or swipe them away. Third, reestablish rituals of closure. Create real thresholds in your day, moments where work officially ends and rest truly begins, entirely unbothered by emails. And finally, cultivate that active militant hope we just talked about.
I'll leave you with this provocative question to ponder today. How will you rebuild the temporal architecture of your own life? Are you going to let the digital swarm dictate your rhythms? Or will you log off, embrace the beautiful friction of real community, and reclaim your time? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. I challenge you today to step out of the inferno of the same and go find a ritual worth keeping.
So, are you feeling burnt out, hyper-connected, and yet somehow just profoundly lonely?
It's a really common feeling these days.
Right. I mean, let that sink in for a moment. You don't start by feeling tired. You start by feeling, absolutely invincible. You're energized, you're crushing deliverables, tracking your sleep data, your side hustle is taking off.
You're just riding this high.
Exactly. High on this socially celebrated drug of your own boundless potential. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, the entire structural integrity of your psyche just collapses.
And it happens so fast.
It really does. You find yourself staring at a glowing rectangle, totally still in an ergonomic chair, no physical exertion at all, yet you're experiencing this paralyzing exhaustion.
Yeah, and a really bizarre sense of isolation, too.
Right. It's not the fatigue of a marathon runner whose muscles are aching. It's something else. You aren't physically drained. You are existentially depleted.
Which is, really the defining paradox of the modern era. I mean, we're engaged in less physical, back-breaking labor than any generation in human history.
Oh, absolutely.
And yet, we are collectively drowning in this ocean of psychological exhaustion. And the reason this feels so uniquely difficult to articulate is that it doesn't map onto our traditional understanding of fatigue.
Because traditional fatigue is just a simple equation, right?
Right, exactly. Energy expended equals tiredness acquired. But what we're experiencing now is, well, it's a systemic failure of how we navigate time and space.
And that is exactly the mission of this deep dive today. We are unpacking a stack of philosophical sources centered on the really brilliant, piercing insights of philosopher Byung-Chul Han.
His work is just so relevant right now.
It really is. His entire project is essentially an autopsy of this modern exhaustion. He argues that this isn't a personal failure, so if you're listening and feeling this way, you aren't just bad at time management.
Right, you don't just need like a new productivity app.
Exactly. You are suffering the consequences of a massive silent shift in how human beings experience time and community. So, okay, let's unpack this because we really need to understand how we got here.
Yeah, so Han's core thesis basically lays the groundwork by saying we have lost the techniques of temporal architecture.
Temporal architecture.
Right. These are the structures that once stabilized human life. And we've replaced them with this frantic, endless stream of data and, honestly, self-exploitation. But to really grasp this, we have to look at the engine driving it.
The economic and cultural operating system we're all stuck in.
Exactly. Han builds on the work of Michel Foucault, who analyzed the 20th century disciplinary society.
Okay, so like factories and prisons.
Yep. For generations, human life was structured by institutions of discipline. The factory, the barracks, traditional schools. And the defining characteristic here is negativity.
Meaning it's based on rules.
Right. It's driven by limits and explicitly by the word should. You should do this. You must not do that.
It's very external.
Highly external. An era defined by external bosses, rigid hierarchies, and authority figures who enforce compliance through basically coercion.
Right. So there was a very distinct line between the oppressor and the oppressed. Like, if you were on a factory line for 14 hours a day in the 1920s, the source of your misery was entirely visible.
Okay, it was the foreman holding the stopwatch.
Or the industrialist taking all the profits. You could point a finger at the cause of your fatigue, and because it was external, there was a logical pathway for resistance.
You could unionize or strike or, sabotage the machinery.
Right, the friction was tangible.
Precisely. That friction generated collective action. But capitalism is this inherently adaptive system. As we moved into the late 20th and early 21st centuries, that disciplinary model, it kind of hit a ceiling of efficiency.
You can only push someone so hard with a whip before they break.
Exactly. Eventually, the worker breaks or they revolt. So the system executed this brilliant but highly insidious pivot. We transitioned from the disciplinary society to what Han calls the achievement society.
Where we shift from should to can.
Yes. We completely abandoned the restrictive framework of should and fully embraced this boundless, hyper-positive framework of can.
Which is the language of limitless potential, right? It's bring your whole self to work or be your own boss. It's basically the entire ethos of Silicon Valley disguised as empowerment.
It feels like liberation on the surface.
I mean, yeah, we stripped away the foreman and the rigid factory schedules, so it feels like we fired our terrible boss but replaced them with an even worse boss, which is ourselves. We are our own worst managers. How does this actually change our psychology?
Well, what's fascinating here is how this internalizes our struggles. If you fail in a disciplinary society, you can blame the system, right? You can blame the oppressor.
Sure.
But if you fail in an achievement society where the motto is you could do anything, well, you only have yourself to blame.
Wow. Yeah, that's heavy.
It is. It leads to profound shame, depression, and this existential exhaustion. And politically, it neutralizes any chance for collective revolution. Because when you replace should with can, you replace external coercion with internal compulsion.
You're saying we whip ourselves.
Exactly. Hahn introduces this concept of auto-exploitation, or self-exploitation. The achievement subject believes they are acting out of absolute freedom.
Like they're just maximizing their own potential.
Right, while simultaneously extracting every ounce of productivity from themselves for the market.
But wait, I have to push back a little on the absolute nature of that. Because we still operate within rigid power structures. Try telling a gig economy delivery driver who gets penalized by an algorithm for taking a bathroom break that they are merely exploiting themselves.
Right, out of a desire for self-actualization.
Yeah. There are absolutely still external bosses. They've just been hidden behind apps. Isn't Hahn ignoring those very real material conditions?
That is a vital critique. And Hahn isn't denying that the gig economy is brutal. What he's analyzing is the psychological internalization of that brutality.
Okay, meaning how we process it.
Right. Today, the gig driver is culturally positioned not as a worker, but as an independent contractor, an entrepreneur.
And a partner, right.
Exactly. The ideological triumph of the achievement society is that it forces the individual to view systemic failure as a personal failure. So when you inevitably burn out, your anger doesn't direct itself outward at the corporation.
It directs itself entirely inward.
Yes, which fundamentally changes the pathology of our modern suffering. Hahn points out that the first stage of burnout is actually euphoria. We throw ourselves into work until we literally collapse. He calls it a disease of freedom.
Because if you are a project that's never finished, then time itself can never really stop, right? It just becomes this endless runway. Which brings us to the architecture of time.
Yes, because we're trapped in this cycle of optimization, we've lost the structures that used to give time its meaning. Hahn defines rituals as techniques of temporal architecture.
Temporal architecture, that's a great phrase.
It really is. The sources quote Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who noted that rituals are to time what a dwelling is to space. They render time habitable.
I love that analogy, because if you stand in a massive empty field, the space is infinite, but it's uncomfortable, you're exposed. But by building a house, you restrict the space, but you make it habitable.
Exactly, you give it meaning. Without rituals, time just becomes a featureless, erratic stream. Rituals carve out distinct rooms within our lifespan. They provide autonomous time.
But like separating childhood and maturity?
Right, or the sacred from the profane. They are the beams that allow a community to dwell within a shared reality.
But let me ask you this. People today are obsessed with routine, right? I brush my teeth every day, I scroll social media every morning, I time block my calendar. Aren't those rituals?
Not according to Hahn. He differentiates routine from ritual quite sharply. A routine is done for efficiency or habit. It lacks symbolic meaning. You time block to increase output.
So it's subservient to production.
Exactly. And routines are entirely subjective and isolated. A true ritual requires a temporary suspension of the ego.
A suspension of the ego?
Yes. You submit to a form and a shared narrative. Rituals connect you to a we and create resonance. They make the world objective, whereas routines in the modern era just reinforce our subjective isolation.
And rituals provide closure, right? Like funerals or coming-of-age ceremonies. Neoliberalism must hate closure because it wants endless additive production.
It absolutely despises closure, because if something is truly finished, production stops. You can see this in how we treat festivals today.
Oh, right. Historically, a festival wasn't just a party. It was a structural pause.
Exactly. It suspended time, created a space for the sacred, and embraced wastefulness, spending time and resources purely for the community with no economic output.
But today, festivals have been profaned by this compulsion to produce. They're just shopping opportunities. Black Friday, commercialized holidays.
We've turned them into marketing campaigns. And without shared rituals to pull us out of ourselves, where does our focus go?
It turns completely inward.
Yes, leading to a profound societal sickness. Hahn calls this the inferno of the same, which is driven by the disappearance of the other.
Okay, we need to clarify what he means by the other, because usually that means marginalization, right? Like othering someone.
Right, but philosophically, the other represents mystery, friction, negativity, and boundaries. It's what you can't instantly comprehend or control.
It's the sharp edge of reality that resists your ego.
Exactly. But modern systems are designed to eliminate friction. We want the world to be a smooth, comforting mirror. And this breeds the narcissistification of the self.
Narcissistification, meaning we blur the boundary between ourselves and the world.
Right. True self-love maintains boundaries and respects the other. Narcissism erases that boundary. The narcissist only values the world insofar as they can see their own reflection in it.
And this modern quest for authenticity just feeds right into that, doesn't it? It feels like a neoliberal trap.
It absolutely is. It forces constant self-monitoring and comparison. It turns diversity into just another exploitable commercial resource.
Like the dating app example from the sources, swiping endlessly reduces complex, mysterious human beings to interchangeable commodities.
Right. You're inputting parameters to generate a customized commodity. It's a quest for a mirror, not a window. You never actually have to face the vulnerability of the unknown.
And Han makes a really dark observation here, doesn't he, about the rise in self-harm.
Yes. He suggests that cutting is a desperate attempt for the isolated, drowning ego to actually feel its own physical boundaries again. When the environment offers no resistance, the pain of the blade provides an undeniable physical limit.
So in trying to be uniquely ourselves and avoiding all friction, we've actually made everyone exactly the same. Here's where it gets really interesting, because this narcissism plays out mechanically on our smartphones.
Oh, absolutely. The smartphone acts as what Han calls a digital confessional and a smart prison.
A smart prison?
Yeah.
Because we lock ourselves inside.
Willingly, we voluntarily expose ourselves, providing psychometric data to algorithms that curate our reality, entirely shielding us from the friction of the other.
And this individual narcissism scales up. If we are all trapped in this inferno of the same, what happens to society?
Well, this is where Han contrasts a true community with the modern digital swarm. A true community is built on shared narratives, bodily presence, and mutual obligations.
Right. But a digital swarm is just a collection of isolated individuals.
Exactly. Like the phenomenon of hikikomori in Japan, individuals sitting alone behind screens. Even if millions are tweeting about the same issue, it's communication without community.
Right. The swarm generates digital noise, outrage, those viral shitstorms, but it lacks the spiritual coherence or the we required for actual collective political action.
Exactly. There's an ancient symbol from the sources, the Tessera Hospitalis, a broken clay tablet shared between guest friends. It's the ultimate symbol of community, hospitality, and enduring mutual obligation.
And contrast that with a modern like button.
The like button is just an echo of the self. It offers zero true resonance. It's frictionless currency.
Which speaks directly to so many people right now. If you've ever wondered why you can have thousands of followers but no one to call when you're in crisis, this is it. Networks offer connection without commitment.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, digital platforms optimize for engagement, not vulnerability. We curate our connections to avoid anyone who might challenge us, effectively destroying the protected spaces necessary for true intimacy and friendship.
And because the swarm communicates exclusively through rapid information, it fundamentally changes how we understand the world and truth itself.
Right. Han differentiates between information and true knowledge, which he calls saber. Information is additive, fleeting, and driven by algorithms.
It's all about speed.
Yes, it speeds up time and has a tiny interval of relevance. But knowledge and truth possess a firmness of being. They require deep duration, time to mature, and they leave a lasting mark on the individual.
But today we have what he calls the crisis of narration. The human brain relies on narratives, which require selecting what is important and leaving out the rest.
Exactly. But the digital cloud, or datism, just hoards everything without hierarchy. It creates a meaningless data graveyard.
It feels like we're constantly eating fast food, but we're starving for nutrients. We have infinite data, but zero wisdom.
That's a perfect way to put it. And it's why fake news thrives in this environment. Fake news is highly optimized information. It travels at the speed of the digital swarm.
Because it doesn't need nuance.
Right. Truth, which requires slow, rational discourse and narrative coherence, just cannot compete in a space where time has been atomized. We are moving from a terrestrial order of tangible things to a digital order of non-things.
So we've diagnosed the burnout, the swarm, the loss of rituals, the fake news. How do we reclaim our humanity and our time from the achievement society?
Han does introduce actionable philosophical practices for resistance, and the big one is the power of silence.
Just literally not speaking.
Well, silence is a vertical structure. It's a ritual that allows for deep listening and contemplation. We must resist the compulsion to constantly communicate and add to the noise.
And we have to embrace thresholds in the other, right?
Absolutely. We have to stop avoiding the pain of the negative. True growth, love, and identity are forged in conflicts, thresholds, and the willingness to face the mystery of the other.
Which requires changing how we pay attention, the pedagogy of looking.
Yes, emphasizing the need to learn to hold attention, to linger, and to practice the contemplative life, the vita contemplativa, rather than being endlessly trapped in hyperactivity.
And lastly, the courage of hope, which is different from optimism.
Very different. Passive optimism just ignores the negative. Active, militant hope requires a narrative. It acts in the darkness to forge a new future, making it essential for true political revolution.
So what does this all mean? Like, practically, for someone listening right now, how do they apply this in a world that demands their constant digital participation?
This raises an important question, because resistance doesn't mean retreating to a cave. It means intentionally carving out islands of deceleration.
Islands of deceleration, I like that.
It means engaging in rituals that have no economic value, saying a full and complete goodbye to things to allow for closure, and choosing the friction of a deep relationship over the frictionless ease of a digital network.
So, just to synthesize all of this for you listening, true freedom isn't found in endless choices, fast content, or frictionless transactions. It is cultivated through contemplation, meaningful pauses, and the shared rituals that give structure and depth to the human spirit.
That's the core message, really.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder today. Think about how much of our technology is focused on eliminating friction. We want everything smooth, fast, easy. But think about a tire on a car. A tire needs the rough friction of the road to actually move forward. Without that friction, it just spins endlessly in place.
It goes nowhere.
Exactly. What if the friction, the boundaries, and the limitations we are constantly using technology to eliminate are actually the very things that give our lives traction? Perhaps the human soul needs the friction of the unknown, the inefficient, and the other to actually move towards a meaningful life.
That's a really powerful image to end on.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We really encourage you to step away from the screen now, embrace a moment of silence, and just linger in the present. We'll see you next time.